Hey YouTubers!
Hi, YouTubers!
Welcome to Never Had the Pleasure. We're here to check out a movie that we've never seen before.
Today we're talking about Waiting for Guffman. Right now we're going to go over what we know about the movie going in and our expectations for what we're going to see, and we will be back later to unpack our experience and give you a bit of a review. Christopher Guest is a director who I've been meaning to round out his filmography in the watching of it.
That's very eloquent.
I've only seen Best in Show before, which came right after this one,
Yep.
right?
Sort
If anyone
of has,
hasn't
like-
seen Best in Show, highly recommend
Yeah.
it. Everybody in it is hilarious.
So good.
Well, you don't know my dog.
A lot of
You
energy
obviously
on a
don't
dog's-
know my dog.
There's a pet
Don't
store
tell
right
me.
downstairs. Why don't we go
A
down?
pet store down the stairs?
Yes.
What are you, a wizard, a genius? Why didn't you tell me that before?
I've seen this before. It's very, very good.
Yeah, I'm very excited to watch this cross movie off our list. That I think will be a pleasure. So Christopher Guest is a director, writer, performer who has a very distinct style for the movies that he makes. It's very improvisational, kind of like Herb, basically.
Larry doesn't even particularly like for me to see the story outline. I really never think about what's going to happen when we start shooting.
They have a sketch of a basic storyline.
Yeah, they do like scene outlines. Yeah.
Everybody kind of knows like what's supposed to happen in a scene, but all of the dialogue's done in the moment.
That she's a dynamite in the sack.
Likewise, I'm sure.
They don't rehearse or anything, which goes to make a more natural film style.
Like this. I like to call it Judd Apatow with editing.
Yeah, well, it's similarly very reliant on improvisation, right?
But they're not 130 minutes long.
His style is mockumentary style. If you've
Which-
watched The Office, you know basically what this is.
If you watch The Office, as everyone has,
Or even like Modern Family does the same thing.
he's not the origin point for the mockumentary, but he was like pretty early in its emergence as like a more common genre or style. He got into filmmaking and comedy through Spinal Tap, which he wrote but didn't direct. I don't think Spinal Tap has his like ensemble players in it.
He has this group of actors that he tends to work with
Yeah.
on like every project, basically.
Which is something that I love. I think when a really creative team is lucky enough to catch lightning in a bottle, just like, don't mess with a good thing.
I don't know about like the origins of this kind of group of actors. Maybe they're just kind of assembled for this film and it worked and everybody liked each other and they kept working.
Yeah, there's a pretty wide age spread in this movie in particular. Parker Posey, I think, being like an actual teenager. Eugene Levy, somehow always just dad aged.
Yeah. So this kind of made a name for him, Waiting for Guffman.
I don't know where his profile was at coming out of Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's a titled British lord.
Oh,
He's also married to Jamie Lee Curtis.
that does ring a bell. She's not in any of these movies, is she?
No. What's with that?
I don't think we're really going to like plot out the events that happen.
This would probably be a tough one to like plan a set piece.
It's odd predicting improv. What kind of neurotic character is Parker Posey playing here?
Yep.
We'll find out. The basic idea of this movie is all of the events that happen in a community production of a play.
Yeah,
And they find out that a critic, who like maybe I guess can give a boost to some of these people's careers, is gonna come review the play, and they're waiting for it. And we get to meet all of these quirky neurotic characters. Comedy will flourish.
Yeah.
Maybe. I think so.
I can verify that it does.
What if you love this movie and I hate it?
I would be quite surprised. Could happen one day. Comedy is very personal, very subjective.
Yeah.
I love this movie, probably as much as Best in Show. It has a slightly less cynical emotional palette than Best in Show, just a hair. Like,
Okay.
it's still pretty biting at times, but it's
I
a little
like-
more like grounded in this like small town,
Sorry.
day-to-day community. Not that Best
that
in-
movie's got
yeah.
like some heart to it. It did a really good balance of poking fun at these people, but also like showing the humanity of them.
Oh my God, it's the all-American love story.
It sure is.
Writ large.
On the marquee. Big letters.
us.
He's a very smart kind of like structure of his films. So.
Yeah, I think like that structure is really important, particularly to a mockumentary. We see that with The Office, right? When the natural course of the project runs, when you try to artificially extend it beyond that, particularly the notion of it being a mockumentary just like completely falls apart. His movies that work best have a very clear implied trajectory or period of time that the mockumentary would logically cover. This is just about a community theater production, which is a capsule of time, and that's a really good choice. Ditto Best in Show. It's about this once a year dog show. It has like a sort of implied beginning, middle, and end. And I think like in a mockumentary, and particularly something that's improvisational, you really want that. Something that I hadn't really considered until we started sort of prepping for this is that like this is maybe not the cheapest way to film before digital storage. You're going into an editing room with like hundreds of hours of real footage, and like film ain't cheap.
Because it is this blend of like in the moment improvisation and documentary style, you kind of get this feeling that they just did like one take for every scene, and it was like ended up perfectly every time. But that's probably not the case with improvisation. Like they probably do the scenes like 20 times.
Yeah, and like continuity is super important. Matching between takes when you're improvising, I think, would be really tough. Parker Posey's over here in one take, and she ends in a different position in another. And so there's like a degree of difficulty and complexity with improvised material that I wouldn't have thought of. I feel like I have like a newfound respect for how incredibly hard it would be to be such a judicious editor that you could get all of this great material down to 90 minutes.
For it not to just feel like one of these Paul Feig movies.
I got one wonton. One split wonton. Look at that, just floating there. That's just a carrot.
Abby, please.
Yes. One wonton.
Every scene
Riffing
derails
and-
itself.
What do
These
I
are just
have to
like
do?
pretty tight 90-minute comedies. That's probably a big part of the success of these movies. Like how much amazing material they probably had to leave on the floor because it just didn't fit and it didn't serve.
You've got all
the-
these just
yeah.
like naturally talented, funny as hell people.
Yeah. This ensemble is like such a joy and such a gift.
They're all so funny and they just have like awesome chemistry. Like it doesn't matter who you pair up.
6 months working with leather and red thread.
Oh,
How much fun
heaven.
was he to be with?
You must be very proud, Mary. Who are you all of a sudden? Good heaven.
There are actors that I think sort of got their start with this that sort of have careers, even though Parker Posey's not somebody you'd think of as like a famous person. She probably was on the level of like a Chloe Sevigny, like doing movies like The House of Yes.
Fred Willard, one of those guys who you might like not know his name, but you definitely know his face and voice.
Yeah.
From like probably a million movies and TV shows. Modern Family.
He probably did like a bunch of SNL and stuff. He was in something. We
Oh,
were talking about doing...
Salem's Lot.
Right. Such a modern comedic character actor. And they're so special.
I think I'm gonna laugh my ass off and we'll have fun things to talk about in the post.
We might just kind of like get to it, watch the thing, and report back. This one you should definitely watch along with us if you haven't seen it before. And we will see you on the other side.
See you soon.
See you soon. 1, 2, 3. We are stage ready. We've done our body work, awareness exercises.
That's right, Sean.
Yes, and
we've got some hot takes. What did you think of Waiting for Guffman?
I really liked it. It's like in a vein that I really like, which is slightly homier, less polished early work that winds up informing grander work of genius that comes later, but thoroughly enjoyable and funny and good, and everyone's very good.
It was definitely very funny. It verged a little bit more on that, I don't think like cringe comedy, but I felt a little bit icky. I found a quote from Christopher Guest. He doesn't really love the term mockumentary because in his opinion he's not mocking the like subjects of the film at all, and I take umbrage with that on this one. Knowing that, like, Christopher Guest is a lord, and, like, this is what he's choosing to poke fun at, kind of is icky to me. It's almost like American Idol, where, like, the entire audition process is just people singing badly. It made me kind of be like, oh, you shouldn't be laughing. Even though I can kind of point to the thing as a whole and say, like, maybe questionable, like, there's definitely funny stuff here.
The, like, little touches that make the performances believably third rate. They're very convincing.
Yeah, and part of it is that this film was done in the mockumentary highly improvisational style, where all of the little touches that did make me laugh come from these talented performers, and the reason that they are able to be so specific and idiosyncratic is because of that.
I just have a bit of a different take on the comedy. I fall with Christopher Guest on this. I think the term mockumentary does the work a disservice, even though that's part of the comedy of this movie. I think what would kind of drive me nuts reading reviews like that is that that's the comedy that people seem to want to focus on. The richest vein of comedy for what I like is not when it's being mocking. I'm not sitting there thinking, like, isn't it funny that there are women in the world that can't carry a tune?
Why didn't you realize sooner? But remains in my empty shell. Hung on to you as tight as I could. Now I'm burning in my personal hell.
There's finer detail stuff that I find way funnier, and then there's the kind of, like, big picture, this is an absurd scenario. The scope of some of the numbers is like when they do musical parodies on, like, The Simpsons. It's like that big a scale. Of course, there's a song with a UFO. He's got such, like, a fine eye. The really, really, like, nitty gritty detail stuff makes it feel so much more, like, palpable. I love that Corky, like, closeted bohemian New Yorker theater guy has found somehow a walk-up loft in Missouri.
Such a great performance. Some fantastic polls.
He's so is Corky. I didn't even know that was Christopher Guest. I watched a bunch of interviews with him after the fact, but going into it, I don't really know what Christopher Guest looks like, because he's not in his other
He's
stuff.
in Best in Show.
Oh, is he?
The, like, small town guy with a greyhound who, like, does ventriloquy.
Ventriloquy?
Ventriloquism.
Okay. That character is just so fully formed. Everything in the apartment, everything feels right. I don't know if this was, like, the intent or not, but his wig, it looks like Meet Me in St. Louis.
Oh.
Like her bangs are, like, too
bangs.
wide. It's, like, exactly the right bad wig.
There are kind of similar people to Corky out there.
John Waters in general is
The real Corky.
who, like, understands that he's a Corky. He's, like, a self-aware Corky, and that gives him a degree of agency over,
and, like, has contributed to a certain amount of success. Just knowing that this is so different than, like, who Christopher Guest is as a person, some of the just, like, idiosyncrasies and his line deliveries, technically impressive performance. In, like, the highest tier of comedy that I have had the pleasure of watching. And I won't go into who else is in that group right now. Wiggle. This set is not up to Corky's standards. It's definitely not up to his standards on their Backdraft musical, which I want to see that. I wonder if it had a shower scene for my dad to interrupt my sleepover during. I wish that we'd gotten a couple other musicals that they had done. I'm imagining, like, The Color Purple or, like, Ghost, just, like, for when this movie came out. Yeah. The whole idea of putting on, like, a stage musical version of Backdraft reminded me a lot of the movie Rushmore.
I had the pleasure.
The main protagonist puts on a play, and it's just, like, incredibly impressive, and MTV commissioned Wes Anderson to, like, make little commercials where the character puts on plays for Out of Sight and Armageddon, movies from that year.
Out of Sight would be quite a racy play.
Yeah.
You'd have to get some good chemistry between the leads, or it would all fall apart.
He's a fantastic director.
Cheers to that. Bottom bump.
I did a mid.
Mid-tier bump. I hope one day we get a bump up to the mid-tier. Alright, I feel like if we recount the movie for ourselves and you, I bet we'll remember a lot of funny stuff that happened. So I guess, like, to kind of roll back, if you didn't watch the movie along with us, Waiting for Guffman is basically two parts. The first half of the movie, we're meeting all of these different small town personalities. They're auditioning. There's the rehearsal process. It's all leading up towards Red, White, and Blaine. So
it's a play.
It's a play. Blaine, Missouri is a small town celebrating its sesquicentennial, and they're
Which
putting
I had
on...
to look up. They didn't use that word when it was Canada's 150th birthday.
There's an even longer term for 175th anniversary.
A quarter quell.
Yeah, a quarter quell. We spend most of our time with the cast and some of the crew of the musical, meeting like a sprinkling of townsfolk throughout, and counselors, so forth, spouses, and so forth.
Yes.
And so forth we will go. And we've got Corky St. Clair, only barely closeted ex-New York theater mastermind behind the musical.
He's come back to his hometown. Everybody talks about like, oh, he used to like work on Broadway.
He himself says he like toiled in obscurity. Given how you've characterized the tone of the humor, the joke was his career.
Basically being slammed down, you know, off Broadway, and then enough is enough, okay? I get the joke.
We've got his like regulars in his community stable, Ron and Sheila.
Married couple, number of productions. They're travel agents who've never been outside of Blaine. Wait, no, he's been outside locally for his surgery.
A corrective surgery. But she definitely gets her hair done in a small town, Missouri.
That was very like, there's something about Mary.
We've got Parker Posey.
Libby May.
Libby
May.
Yeah.
She works at the DQ.
Yeah, she works at the Dairy Queen, and she will be happy to tell you all about it. Really good.
She had the energy of like a hockey player talking during halftime about how...
Did you say halftime? We've been watching Friday Night Lights.
Halfway through the game,
you mean
they're trying to score.
Like between periods?
Whatever. Anytime you tune into a hockey broadcast, they're just talking about, we have our sticks and we pass the puck and we're trying to score goals.
We went straight down the ice, all the way down the ice. You know, when you're a team, you got to play together as a team. And I think we're really coming together as a team tonight.
You know, it's hard to win games, but we're going to give it our best. Sometimes
they're
it
on
works,
the ice.
sometimes it doesn't. And that's a sport for you. Canadian pet peeve of mine.
Yeah, so like that, but about Dairy Queen.
About Cokes and burgers and making the burgers.
Yeah, then we've got a local dentist.
Dr. Allen Pearl.
And his lovely Fargo accent wife.
They have a very sweet relationship. I like that at the end when she's like cheering him on. And she's just like very genuinely amused. And
Yeah, well, and I guess like that's another side to the whole like mocking people that are less talented. If you don't have the kind of like cultivated taste profile, you could just like sit there and be genuinely entertained. She's cool because like you see that, right? She's seeing this new side of her husband, and and it's like exciting and she's proud. There are touches like that, even if like maybe he lost his way a little bit with like the tone.
Kind of the only other major one that we haven't talked about yet is
Bob Balaban.
Bob Balaban.
There's definitely a note from while we were watching that just says, "It's the boss from Alias," but he's not. He's not. It's not the same actor. No, that's her dad.
Her dad was that important to her?
He was a central figure in the show. Yeah, you'll see one day when we branch out into TV. Because no one's talking about Alias. A lot happening.
Why is her dad so important? I really liked Bob Balaban in this movie. He is the music teacher at the local high school, and he's having to put up with Corky taking over.
It's an unhappy marriage.
Gives great like deadpan reactions. And when we do get eventually to the performance, he went all out with the orchestra, really juiced that lemon for all it was worth. The like timpani drum player, like also playing the trumpet.
Yeah, I really like that overture.
Yeah, I wonder what that orchestra would have been like if Corky had been in charge.
You probably would have gotten like a DJ.
Like, yeah, like
probably like another like beefcake dude that he could groom.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, Matt Kessler. I like forget that he's in this. Johnny, like the mechanic. Yeah, like he's basically the lead in Last Days of Disco, one of my very favorite movies ever, and he's basically just in these two things. I don't really have a ton else to say about him because
his whole like storyline is kind of like picked up and then dropped.
His character ultimately functions as like a pretty elaborate setup for the joke of Corky playing this like
strapping farmhand.
Yeah, that joke doesn't work nearly as well if Corky is playing that from the beginning, right? Like the surprise reveal is what makes it work.
Kind of gone through all of the main characters. The next step in their journey is auditioning. So we got an audition montage. Presumably inspired many others from Glee to High School Musical.
Barely familiar with either. And maybe even reality TV. Like we were talking about before. Parker Posey's, I'd say it's my favorite. 100% committed.
She's trying to do like a diamonds are a girl's best friend kind of thing. But just like it's a completely inappropriate venue for that.
Technically sexy, or at least like sexual. Yeah. But it's also like grotesque. Very like Cupid doll, like Betty Boop energy to it.
I think we kind of talked about Fred and Sheila.
Ron
and Sheila.
She knows how to project.
Her shout acting.
In any volume of Broom, she's got one setting.
Midnight at the Oasis.
Yeah, Fred Willard basically had the idea for and structure for his number with Cahterine O'Hara. The skit parts are from like a British tea commercial from the 80s or something.
We'll need some coffee to go with that ride, won't we?
Well, you're always full of surprises.
Pity I have to leave.
Leave?
I'm on the first flight to Milan in the morning.
That's terrible.
Why?
We don't serve cold blood.
Eugene Levy, I think we kind of talked about. He does a bit of a medley.
Yeah, a medley within a montage. This like medley of just like the most basic like fodder.
But he loves it. The funniest part of the montages for me is the reaction of Corky and
Bob Bellman.
Yeah, just reacting to him.
Transported away. But
it's just like trying to like keep it secret.
Yeah. Again, neither of us is totally on board with the punching down inherent in this concept, but you cannot deny the like incredibly skilled, nuanced punching down that occurs in stuff like the auditions. Obviously with any kind of movie star, like to a degree, they're playing themselves. But I think that tends to be more true in comedy. You think of even like the old time greats, Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn, into Chris Farley and Jim Carrey. In this movie, these people are playing like true characters that they kind of like lose themselves in. That's not as expected in comedy. So many little touches that like really sell the cringe element. The way Parker Posey like loses her balance and kind of topples over at the end. Eugene Levy like holding a note, like when you're playing SingStar and you're trying to like sing to the meter. You know what I mean?
A karaoke game.
It's crazy that like there's so much talent involved in the team that made this movie that there are even people on like the total periphery of it or who didn't even make the cut. Our first glimpse of who turns out to not be Jamie Lee Curtis on the piano. Every time she was in frame, I was like, is that her? And then she turns her head and it's just like very obviously not.
I saw in a YouTube comment on like the trailer or something, somebody saying the piano teacher is my high school music teacher.
Little did they know that it could have been Meryl Streep.
She wishes. This is like Meryl Streep's favorite movie.
I mean, this does seem like the kind of thing that like she would kill to be invited and like never will be.
I think she would be great because she's not a great singer.
There's an outtake where Bob Odenkirk did an audition.
Oh, okay.
And I can't remember what he does exactly. I did watch it, but if there's anything to it, we'll probably put a clip right there.
Here balmy breezes blow, pure joys invite us.
David Cross has a little scene.
He pops up for like one scene. You get the sense that like there's probably a bunch of other stuff. There must have been so much material dropped.
They shot everything and they printed everything to go through in the editing booth.
Yeah.
So they had like literally dozens of hours of footage. In the pre, we talked about like how it must have been really expensive. They shot on 16 mil, probably edited on 16 mil as well, comped it and upscaled it to 35 mil for the theater. Christopher Guest sat with the editor and they watched everything.
Cahterine O'Hara is talking about how each day after filming, the big treat would be like going to watch the dailies.
Yeah.
The only way to see this movie fully was to like watch the dailies every single day.
Which would be like such a, like, of course that team wound up feeling really tight and like looked back on the experience fondly enough to want to do it again. Yeah, Cahterine O'Hara said that outside of the outline, Christopher Guest had basically never fed anybody a line or made any suggestions. That's like a pretty crazy level of restraint and trust in your cast.
He's also like on set performing in it himself and is already using that improv muscle. It would have been so easy for him to just be like, I'm the director and I'm going to tell you the line.
Yeah,
right?
Just like steer and nudge things. It's cool that it was such a like genuinely collaborative approach. I also read the cast takes like an equal cut of the profits of the movie. Nobody is ranked above anybody else. Even in the credits at the end of this, it's pointed out that they're in alphabetical order. He and this whole crew lucked out in coming of age during this like pretty narrow window in time
where like this movie could be in theaters and people would go see it.
Yeah, now it would get sold to Netflix and it would be like one of 6 things that they dropped that one day. That like bubble of time, that's a big part of what being a film buff, and like particularly with a focus on classic film, you get to see in hindsight all these movies that could only have happened in like those exact circumstances, and it can make them feel really special. Corky also solicits a couple farm hands.
He goes to recruit.
He goes to groom Johnny, is what he does.
And he grooms him by appealing to Johnny's desire to have a career like Charles Laughton.
Well, you know what? That's what Charles Laughton said, you know, and look what happened. Does that appeal to you in any way?
Which yeah, I guess worked.
It didn't work on Johnny's uncle or dad or whoever. Bill Murray.
You changed the fan bill.
Just looks a lot like him.
I was like, wait.
And the old fart.
Our narrator. With the beans.
From casting, we're basically straight into the rehearsal segment.
Corky's trying to like loosen them up.
Yeah, we got like movement exercises, which had a very you could stop at 5 or 6 stores vibe. The like, I would in real life want to be in 0 of these situations. So I'm glad there's a movie that lets me like be a fly on the wall, because like I don't want to do movie exercises with Corky, but I want to be there for it.
Part of the rehearsal segment, we get to know our cast a little bit better, go out for some Chinese food, one of the best scenes of the movie.
He said, why don't you get one of those vagina enlargements?
Oh, dear. Can we have some coffee over here? Have you tried the egg rolls?
In the way that they talk about the food, even her not being able to keep up.
Ron being inappropriate.
Yes. Very. And I think the scene that felt closest to the kind of tone that he steers more towards with Best in Show.
More like character based, really.
Yeah.
You get the sense that there's some tension between Ron and Sheila.
Oh, yeah.
Honey, I need a hand here. You got to be Ralph Terry, relief pitcher brought in the late innings. The Yankees were leading 7-6.
She's great in that scene.
Yeah, it's definitely her scene to shine. Which, like, I'm glad she got, because it's pretty clear that, like, she's in the submissive role of this relationship. She talks about how, like, as a performer, that felt freeing for her because that's, like, not where she came from as a performer. I guess, like, in the SCTV days, was kind of, like, a louder style of performance. This sort of, like, forced her into a different vein of comedy. It's easier to be grateful for something like that when you still get at least, like, one good scene to kind of, like, really play out your instincts and be the star.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the mix, we get word of Guffman for the first time.
Yeah.
This New York theater critic.
I thought I was going to turn out that, like, it's part of, like, a piece on bad community theater, and then, like, everyone would see the article and not be happy. I guess maybe something that I would have appreciated. Would have given them, like, a chance to, like, rebut.
Yeah.
Everybody kind of works themselves up into a bit of a tizzy, thinking that, like, this is their leap to Broadway. Corky doesn't help with clamping down on that. Libby May's idea of her dreams coming true and getting to move to New York, she talks about, like, really, New York is an
island full of people of
different colors and different ideas and Italian guys or, you know, I watch TV and stuff.
That's like her understanding of New York.
Oh, maybe she'll get there one day. Hope she gets to watch TV with some Italian guys if that's what she really wants. Maybe break out the rest of the chicken. We get a little bit of a second act crisis moment of like Corky not getting the $100,000 that he wants. Just kind of spins out.
You're just bastard people, and I'm going home, and I'm gonna bite my pillow. It's what I'm gonna do.
I loved when the cast goes back to his apartment to lure him back, and Parker Posey just gets so frustrated. She's just like, Jesus Christ!
Yeah, she's really got like a hair trigger. The best scene in his performance for me is when he's like laying back in his pink loft apartment, letting the city council like heap praise on him and coax him back in.
Oh, yeah.
And this egomaniacal look comes over his face. Holy shit, this is a good performance.
So before we know it, it's the night of the big premiere.
Everybody takes their seats. They wait with bated breath.
Finally witness this musical. Do you have a favorite song?
Oh man, I love them all. They're like so on the wire. They're barely parody. It's ridiculous to have a number in your musical about manufacturing stools, but like the songs feel like real musical songs.
Yeah, my favorite was A Penny for Your Thoughts.
The physical comedy of Corky, everything about him is butting up against what the performance is supposed to be. Yeah, that's exactly what I was just gonna say.
Yeah,
like yikes.
And Eugene Levy with the eyes.
He does kind of belong on the stage. Like, it clearly draws out this whole other side of him. I mean, I think they kind of all have something going for them. Like the Martian one, it's so like
boring.
Going from these like pioneer numbers and to this like completely disconnected 50s aesthetic.
Cahterine O'Hara's like, that ain't no feed storage bin. Some of these lines will like burrow in my head.
I guess this is as good a time as any to talk about what they cut. There's a full 6-minute long number called This Bulging River. It's really funny, and like all of the music, it's also kind of like good and catchy. That more than maybe anything like speaks to the like incredible discipline and judiciousness in the editing. That number is great, and it would be so cool to have it in the movie. And the movie is also only like 82 minutes long, so like there's space for it.
It's something that like took a lot of effort, as much of the budget as any of the other numbers.
Yeah, and like somebody has had to write all this music. These are all original songs. Despite all that going like towards the case of including it, it would have thrown off the balance of the final product, right? Like the musical portion of this is exactly as long as it should be.
Yeah, that's true.
All throughout the musical is just like so great.
And the crowd eats it up.
Yep. We get a big rousing final number.
Very impressive.
With a balloon drop worthy of Big H. And then the come down.
Yeah. Well, they finally figure out that Guffman never showed. The guy sitting in his seat is just some guy.
I thought they played that really well. Like it felt very plausible that he would just sort of get like rushed backstage. It didn't get to like a Frasier level that like
he's just like, okay, I'll come backstage. Like the musical, just like everybody else.
Yeah, it's basically straight from there to the epilogue, right?
3 months later, Dr. Pearl is living out in Miami. Ron and Sheila are film extras.
Wish them all the best.
Parker Posey is working hard on a low fat, no fat,
healthy Blizzard. Her characterization is definitely the saddest.
At the end of the movie, she's still working at DQ and like doesn't have a plan for having a better life at all.
It was an interesting choice to have the sort of underpinning blue collar sadness show through so like openly at the end, because you're right, like her story ends on a very down note. It doesn't end like making a murderer down, but things aren't looking great for her. And yeah, Corky has propelled himself all the way back to the Big Apple. He's running John Waters' store from his episode of The Simpsons.
What kind of lunchbox do you want?
Oh boy.
I want like a Spotlight lunchbox. I love the movie Spotlight.
I just want like a Bennett like Beckham, like a thermos featuring like the band Texas. Oh yeah, I want like a thermos where like when you open it, it plays Inner Smile.
I feel
love
like
Bennett like Beckham.
If any of this is going to come true, it's that.
You basically had that as a toothbrush.
Yeah. That's it.
That's a wrap.
In our discussion, we've both kind of addressed ideas the other person hasn't really grappled with fully.
I'm pretty conflicted over how comedy should limit itself and the impact that that has on the craft. I feel pretty like fundamentally aligned with people that talk about comedy being in jeopardy because of restrictions on what you can and can't cover as
PC culture running amok in comedy.
I'm on that team, but I also think that we are in a time right now that calls for more empathy. Mocking or punching down in this cultural moment like feels kind of counterproductive. And I think like because comedy inherently involves a mocking tone to somebody, like somebody is always the butt of a joke, it doesn't tend to age as appropriately.
Yeah, like what is acceptable as the butt of the joke has changed.
Yeah, sometimes that makes things less funny, and that's particular to where you're coming from, your background, and also just like how you're feeling that day.
Yeah, I probably am taking in too much of the discourse around the movie rather than the movie itself, but it's not there.
You went looking for discourse about how it treated people because you already had this feeling.
Yeah, I'm still kind of grappling with this a little bit, so I'm gonna give this 2.5 stools. Normally I would just let this kind of meanness roll off my back, but it did come off to me as like a little unnecessarily cruel.
It's kind of baked into the concept that it's going to be a little mean, and I don't know how much you could have really tamped that down without
just like
hurting
changing the
overall funniness.
It came off to me different than Best in Show did. I fully acknowledge this is his first time like directing something. It's not exactly fair to hold that to the same standard as the director's later work. Going off of Best in Show, he does a good job of kind of course correcting for me.
Best in Show is a more kind of like major work, and this is a little bit homier and more minor scale. I find it pretty like comforting to just kind of like slot yourself in.
What about these Michelin stars?
I'm gonna go with 1. I just want to be judicious. In the real world Michelin system, I think like even Paris only has like 60 1-star Michelin restaurants. I would give Best in Show 2. Christopher Guest, he's a model of judiciousness, and I think we owe him that.
Well, we're giving it.
He and JLC will be sitting in their baronistry or whatever the fuck they call it. At the end, they'll think, you know what, that's tough but fair.
For sure. I'm just waiting for Christopher Guest's mocking of us.
Somebody's gonna do the great like VidCon satire.
Yeah.
And there will be small potato podunk nobodies in that.
Fair enough. Do you have any recommendations?
I would very strongly recommend watching this movie. If like you didn't, maybe you're kind of getting the sense that our praise has been a little tempered. I'd say like no reservations, go nuts.
I seem to be the only one who has a problem with this movie.
I don't really have a ton to recommend like outside of his oeuvre.
Something like Ed Wood has a little bit more empathy for the characters in it. They're like equally deluded into thinking they're like making something great and still kind of pokes fun at them and just overall more empathetic.
I hadn't thought of that, but that's a great recommendation. I could totally go for a review of that sooner than later. So in light of our discussion of the state of comedy and what is and isn't fair, I will expect a 1,000 word essay from everybody in the comments on where they're standing on comedy in 2020.
God.
So get to it.
Thanks for watching, guys. Every video, we're trying to kind of take on a different kind of movie, which means our episodes are different every time. So if you like this one, check out one of our others. Never know what'll be on our channel next.
But we do.
Could be a movie about you.
Whew. Goodbye. We're getting a stereo effect.